Welcome back, everybody, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We have a fun segment for you here at the end. I don't know, fun, but certainly something to for you to pay attention to if you are applying to any of these schools. We're talking about schools that maybe have some atypical deadlines, or maybe they have their own applications. So it's not going to be quite as easy as simply adding them to the Common App and sending everything out by, say, November 1 or January 1. If you're doing that or thinking that way, you might actually miss some important deadlines. So joining me today for this conversation is my colleague here at Bright Horizons, college coach, Lauren Randall, who also happens to be a former admissions officer at Georgetown, one of the schools we're talking about today. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Beth.
So Georgetown, not really an atypical deadline here, right? What's different about Georgetown?
Yeah, so early action, similar deadlines around November 1st, but what makes it really different is that they're not on the common application. And I think in today's world, that alone makes it unusual.
Right.
We were trying to think of some schools that have their own, that only accept their own application. So let me back up just a little bit. I think that there's plenty of schools out there that do have their own application, but they are also on the Common App and they accept either one. They don't have a preference of their own app or the Common App.
Right.
I think it's really rare for a school to only take their own application. And a few that immediately come to mind is Georgetown, MIT, Rutgers, and the military academies.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly common schools for maybe less so the military academies, although we do have students every year applying to those. But certainly MIT, Georgetown, Rutgers, many of our students are going to apply to these schools. There's always that moment, right, where you realize, like, oh, that's a whole other application that we have to be thinking
Yeah, what do
about
you
with
mean
these
I
schools.
can't just use my Common App? Like, what?
Yeah,
Where is it? I'm
exactly.
searching the Common App and I don't see George. I'm like, that's because it's not there.
Exactly. You used to work at Georgetown, as I may have shared with our listeners before, but maybe not. When I was applying to college, the dean of admissions at Georgetown was the dean of admissions, and I am not that young, so he's been there for a while. I'm curious about your sense of why Georgetown continues to only offer their own application and kind of, yeah, why, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we also have a wonderful colleague now at Bright Horizons who worked at MIT. And so I was chatting with her about this, because I know Georgetown's philosophy. And I was like, well, why MIT? Before I answer the question, I have absolutely no idea why Rutgers only takes their own
Right.
application. I think it's pretty clear with the military academies, they have specific questions, they are expressing their values and what they're looking for through that unique application. Rutgers, I really can't speak to. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But when I was talking to our colleague, former admissions officer at MIT, what I learned was really similar to Georgetown's philosophy. And the dean you're talking about, I worked for him, and he was really clear that that he did not want to artificially inflate application numbers.
Mm,
And let's be clear, Georgetown and MIT have very, very, very low acceptance rates.
right.
But he said, he was really clear. He said, if we wanted single digit acceptance rate tomorrow, just go on the Common App. It will increase application numbers. The
Right.
more they are not increasing seats on campus or beds on campus. So the more applications that are submitted, the lower the acceptance rate.
Right.
And so that was first and foremost, his philosophy. And that's exactly what I heard about MIT as well.
Yeah. And I can get behind that. And certainly as someone who's helping students through the process, or for both of us, it definitely is one of those moments where you think, ugh, a whole other application. But what it does tend to do is weed out the students who are just saying, I just thought I'd throw another application in here. There's no throwing in an application when you have to, in essence, craft an entirely different application than the others that you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the dean of admissions at Georgetown was very clear. Students would say, well, you're making it so much harder to apply. He's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I am. It should not be that easy to just throw out 30 applications, and really felt that while there's a point to the common application, it didn't necessarily help college admissions as a whole.
Right.
That it increased applications. The same student is now applying to more schools. They're only going to accept one offer. They can only attend one school. So he had no issue with the fact that, yes, it was harder to apply to Georgetown, and he liked it that way. And similarly, talking about MIT's philosophy, maybe, not saying like, let's make it harder.
Right.
But because it's a self-selecting pool,
Mm-hmm.
students are intentionally filling these applications out. They want it. So we definitely found that it was a more competitive pool, meaning that the right students were applying.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what our colleagues said about MIT, that it was more of a matchy. The students were more matchy
Yes.
with the school because they really wanted to apply.
Right. Yeah, they really had to think about it. I mean, with Georgetown, you can basically take your main Common App essay and use it for the Georgetown essay. And so in essence, you are really simply writing supplemental essays like you would for anyone. But there's no denying that the act of having to fill out an entirely different application is a lot more work than simply adding a school to your list on the Common App and then answering those supplemental questions. So I get it. I'm not always a huge fan of different philosophies. When Georgetown went test optional, they really were very clear that if you had any testing at all, they wanted it. I didn't love that. But on this front, I kind of can get behind. I kind of can get in this, which is, someone should record this and for posterity's sake. All right, so that covers those schools. Just important for everyone out there to be aware at the very base of it, right, is we're not being exhaustive here, but MIT, Georgetown, the military academies, Rutgers, these are schools with their own applications. So if you're wondering why you can't find them on the Common App, they're not there, and they're not on the coalition or another application other than their own. So. All right, another thing we wanted to talk about today was a number of schools we're seeing lately with earlier deadlines than November 1. And, just a few years ago, UNC Chapel Hill was really the only one that came to mind for me. And they had that October 15th deadline. And that came fast. And a few times I did have a student say, oh, I want to add UNC Chapel Hill, but hadn't mentioned it until maybe the first week in October, at which point they either had to scramble to hit that 10/15 deadline or go regular decision. As we are on the record here, or certainly I am, early action is your or priority admission is your path to these larger state schools. I cannot stress enough the importance of hitting that early action deadline. So something has happened and a number of other schools have joined UNC. Lauren, any thoughts about why you think this is? And then maybe some of those schools, if you could toss those out for us.
Sure. I have not spoken directly to their admissions office. I can only project that my guess is that they need more time to review the number of applicants. Even 2 weeks difference, it makes a big difference in terms of getting through the number of applications. That's the only thing I can guess. But in terms of, it is interesting of who is trending this way. And it really seems to be focused on large publics in the Southeast.
Yes.
So I don't know if they're just all getting on you, if now they're competing again or with each other. And UNC was the trailblazer on this. I'm not exactly sure. But when we're going through some of them and looking at these, and primarily it's early action, large public schools, Southeast. And then there's some nuance to it. Could just be for their own in-state residents applying to these programs. So, by the time this show airs, we will have already missed or passed the Georgia Tech early action deadline for Georgia residents only, and that's October 10th. October 10th. So October 10th for Georgia residents for early action to Georgia Tech. A couple of others that are early and coming up really soon. So we mentioned UNC Chapel Hill, that's October 15th, but so is University of Georgia. Clemson is October 15th. The University of South Carolina is October 15th. an early decision one that I found is the College of Charleston. So they're also
Hmm.
October 15th, which I was surprised by, for them to be October 15th as well. Just a few other out there. So Florida State residents only, for Florida State University, they're also October 15th. And then Texas A&M has nothing to do with your residency, but Texas A&M for engineering applicants, they're October 15th. So
Got it. Yeah. And it is interesting, the different nuances. And again, as admissions offices, we hear a lot of talk about making it easier, streamlining the process. But at the end of the day, they're going to do what works for them. And so it's always a little like, and I know we're not school counselors. If you're in a school setting, these earlier deadlines are even a bigger challenge, right? Because you are responsible for writing recommendation letters. You have to make sure that the teachers who are writing the recommendation letters, if any of these schools require them, are writing those letters. You have to be sure you're getting your pieces in. I know for University of South Carolina, where my son applied last year, so long as his piece was in by October 15th, it was okay, but the school stuff had to be in by November 1st. So it wasn't like there was a huge, you know, additional amount of time for them to get their pieces in. But I have to imagine, and you're a former school counselor, did those much earlier deadlines, are they problematic for you in the way that I've just kind of laid out?
they're not fun.
Were they?
They're not fun. I mean, it really does. It's a lot of work on the school counseling office, because a lot of times the students don't catch it, or they come in last minute and say, "Oh, wait, I didn't realize it's 2 weeks earlier. Can you get this out in time?" And while it's not that hard for a click of the button with a transcript, if the letter of recommendation, and not just from the counselor, but from the teachers as well, wasn't ready, that can be pretty stressful. So it wasn't something that we loved, but again, it's not the vast majority of schools. There's just some outliers.
Right. And I just, want to put a PSA out there to all the parents. This is really on your student to know these deadlines. We talk a lot about getting organized, having a sheet. The right response is not to go and yell at the school counselor. And I know that there are parents who do this. Most parents don't, but I know there are parents who do this. This is really for your student to be on top of this. There's only so much that a school counselor can do, especially if they have a caseload of more than 50, and many of them will have as many as 200, 300, 400 students, maybe more, that they're responsible for. So it's up to the student. And I think the really tough thing is that at many public schools especially, but schools in general, many counselors will have deadlines. You need to get your stuff in 2 weeks ahead of the school's actual deadline. And in that case, if you're looking at a October 10th deadline, Georgia Tech, Georgia residents, you are probably needing to get your stuff done by the end of, or just shy of the end of September, right? So like, that's not a small thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, one more thing I would add is, and I'm not going through any specific schools, but be aware that there could be different deadlines, earlier deadlines for any special material, like an art portfolio, or mostly art portfolios.
Yeah.
So be aware, if you are submitting that, to double check deadlines.
And I think another thing that we see sometimes, right, is that an earlier deadline for merit. University of South Carolina just announced early action this year for the very first time, but before this year, they had a priority deadline that was December 1st. It wasn't an early action program, but if you wanted to be considered for merit aid, you needed to get it in by that point. Emory has something similar with regular decisions. So I think my ultimate takeaway for everyone here, and Lauren, I don't know if there's anything else you would add, is just be organized. When you know the schools that you're planning to apply to, or as you add them to your list, get their application deadlines on there, read the fine print, and know when things are available so that you can plan accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, if you do, that is the point, that you can't be organized unless you know your list. So it is the time to wrap up that list.
Yes, please. It should be wrapped by now. If it isn't, this is your homework for the day. Get that done and finalized by no later than October 15th. And earlier, if you're going to apply to any of those schools we mentioned earlier today. Lauren, thanks so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Beth.
Sure. All right. Next week, I am back. I mentioned, I think I'm hosting pretty much every show this month, which I'm excited about. And when we come back next week, it'll be 10 days to November 1st, another huge deadline. We're also going to be we're going to be answering your questions, doing a listener Q&A. So you don't want to miss that. Don't forget, leave a review on Apple Podcasts for us. The more we get, the easier it is for others to find us. Obviously, we would love it if they're 5-star reviews. If you are tuning in every week, presumably you find this really helpful. If you have questions, you can send them to us via Facebook, on Instagram. You could send them to our email address, gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. And don't forget, we are here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific.